hoping to recruit Phil as the new fire behaviour analyst, but it looks like he's not going to hang around long enough. Thanks, Phil. I've subtitled the fire behaviour analysts saviours or disciples, and I guess to some extent a little bit of both in a sense. I think when there's a lot of pressure on, there's a lot of hope or expectation that you're going to get the answer is exactly what this fire is going to do from your fire behaviour analyst. But I think there's almost a more important role that the fire behaviour analyst performs, which is actually being able to take up the new research and basically change the culture within organisations. So I guess I'll speak about a couple of those things. In terms of the role of fire behaviour analyst, it fits into a basket of predictive services, and I guess under the AIM system, it's been washed out a little bit, I must say, from some earlier versions, but within the situation officer role is under the planning section there, under the situation, you've got predictions and options to be considered, and I've got to say a lot of those predictions and options that I've seen in incident action plans are pretty rudimentary and not totally fair income. Usually there's an option that's fully explored and the others are sort of not explored so much. And then I guess if you look at a bit further, this is version 3 of AIM, so I think there's version 4 sitting around. There's an option to put people in, like fire behaviour analysts, as a technical advisor, where you provide expert advice as required, for as long as required, when situations are complex enough to require that. And that could fit underneath the incident controller or within the planning section, depending on what the incident controller desires there. So what we're saying is the situation officers can do a lot of this work when it's more routine, but there's been a lot of significant value added by having a specialised person who has the training and the space to be able to make considered opinions about, considered evaluations, if you like, on different options and what the fire might do. So after about 5 years, we've managed to finally get a national unit of competency up. So under the public safety training framework, and it was only May this year that this was signed off. It's already version 2 and it's the first one out, but anyway. So that at least gives us an opportunity to provide some national recognition of a unified set of skills. To date, the only organisation that I'm aware of that actually has put this unit on their scope of so the RTOs, the training organisations, is in Queensland. But there are issues, I think, in other states, but at least there's a little somewhere to work from here. Within that document, there's a long list there of what the required skills might be, about getting data, making sense of that data, and then basically being able to put it into a form that is going to be useful and meaningful to operations people. So in the end, really what you're trying to do here is make better use of your resources, prevent the level of loss, and if possible, actually get a more positive outcome from the fire experience. We've got a culture, I would have to say, in the fire industry generally of just throwing as many resources in and being as busy as we can. I know that's a bit rough, but that's what you see so many times. As long as people are busy, then that's success. And that was brought out really quite clearly during the Bushfire Royal Commission in Victoria, when the Chief Fire Officer at the time got up and was challenged as to, well, how well do you think you did on Black Saturday? And his response was, well, we had more resources on the ground, more people, and no loss of firefighter lives on that day. I think we did fabulously well. It was a fabulous effort. And it was a wrong measure to be using to consider your level of success. It's not about how many resources you were able to deploy and how busy you were. It's really what were the outcomes. So under this National Unit of Competency, we've at least specified what we think the fire behaviour analysts ought to do. So a little bit of history here. Just be aware there's a few dubious characters like Miguel here, and we've got Andrew up the back here. We basically, in Victoria, we started formalising this process, I guess, in the late 1980s, where it was a combined effort with between a fire behaviour person and a meteorologist, and we had an outposted service. And really, I guess by the time we got to 2003, we didn't have enough meteorologists and fire behaviour people to be sending out to individual fires, so it became a bit more centralised. So in 2004, the Forest Fire Management Group provided some in-principle support for setting up a fire behaviour analyst program. The Bushfire CRC, combined with DSE, took a lead role in that, and Liam Fogarty in particular was quite successful in getting some funds from the National Disaster Mitigation Program to basically set up a course, and that's been the core of what's been running since. So the first pilot program was in 2007, or the pilot program, and we've been running courses since then. And in my abstract I wrote about 150 people been through the course. When I added them up, it's 269. So is that plus or minus 50%? Maybe 150 is sort of more active, maybe is what I mean. So we've had 8 courses in Victoria, 5 in New South Wales, 2 in Tasmania, 1 in Queensland, 1 in Western Australia so far. Queensland had the nicest foyer, that's why you've got a picture of the Queenslanders, I think. So it's taken a long time to actually get the role up and running, getting people qualified for the course, and there's still not a full understanding of what this role can really offer and how it is so distinct from a situation officer. So one of the things that we learned in Victoria was it was important to have standard products so people knew what to expect. So we thought there were 3 major products that needed to come out. One was basically a fire spread prediction map, which was to be used by the operational people within the agencies, if you like. So this is your best estimate of where you think the fire might be, with a document, the third list point there, about the assumptions you've had to make and what some alternative scenarios might be. And the second one on the list there is the potential fire impact zone. This is basically saying that areas within this zone are areas that might be impacted by fire perhaps in the next 24 hours. And that's been used for public distribution so that a warning can be produced. And that might mean that you might have embers falling in your area, so you might have spot fires around your place, not necessarily saying that you're going to be exposed to the full force of the fire. And it's a potential as well, so it covers a slightly bigger area than is what might be expected first up. But it constrains the area that might be affected. Secondly, I suppose we've got within the organisation of the incident management team, you've got the ability to undertake options analysis and start to look at some fair income options for different strategies, and do a risk analysis and do a time and space sort of analysis to see whether so many strategies that are set up are doomed to fail from the beginning because you haven't got the resources or the time to fully implement it before the fire will have already overrun that. So trying to avoid those situations. Through a fire behaviour analyst in a quiet room at the back can probably consider that and then pass that information on. And also a major function that the fire behaviour analyst can perform, and it's not always used, but provide a bit of an outlook for the next few days or the next few weeks, using the same sort of skills that they've got for doing the fire behaviour prediction. Pretty important for planning and preparedness. And then thirdly, it doesn't happen anywhere near as much as it probably should, is the use of the fire behaviour analyst in planning and plan burning. So the same sort of skills that lead you to understand fire better and fire across the landscape will lead to better fire management plans, better location of strategic zones and the like, and a more rigorous systematic look at the risk that's associated with bushfire in that landscape. So this is a bit of an example of a map that was produced back in the 2006-07 fire season. Lots of fires going in the landscape. This ended up being 1 million hectares, looking at, in this case, a day-by-day expectation of what the fire might do. And this is something that would be used internally. There's a document which you don't need to read this because no one ever does, except the lawyers. and then they go through it word by word and understand, well, why did you actually use this word when... And so, but it's useful just to, often when you're putting this document together, you start to realise, oh, I don't think that's really true. I need to go back and actually revise that. So it's a bit of a helpful checklist, but a summary as well. And this is the other document, which is the another map, which is basically showing what you expect the possible extent of the fire might be in the next 24 hours. And that's, in a way, the best summary of this information. But it's in a standard sort of form with some use-by dates on it and a few comments plastered on it, but kept relatively simple, and dashed lines meant to represent that there's some uncertainty about this. But in this particular case, I was involved in it. We've got some hot spots that are showing up around there, and I'm just going to concentrate a little bit down the bottom area here. This is quite critical in Victoria because it's just north of a major water catchment, the Upper Tolhust Reservoir, which provides about 70% of the water, between 60 and 70% of the water to Melbourne. So it's fairly important to protect that catchment, and there was great concern if the fire got in the catchment and the water quality would make the water undrinkable, and there was no way of treating that water. So there was a lot of work going into trying to keep the fire out of that catchment area. So we started off with where the fire was, and if we look a little closer at what's going on here, there was a great wish to get backburning and preparation and backburning done along this line as quickly as possible. But the problem was it was just before a bad weather day coming up. And so in this case I had to argue quite strongly that by putting backburning along here, all it was going to do is guarantee there was going to be some escape into the catchment, and you'd guarantee you would achieve what you were trying to avoid. And so there was a lot of argy-bargy, is probably the best way to put it, went on to prevent that operation going ahead until the next day, when the winds were favourable and the conditions were much more favourable. And one of the reasons why that we were able to win that argument was the predictions sort of showed that even under the worst case scenario, the fire would only just nearly get to that line anyway. And then it would make the operation much easier because you've got a much smaller unburnt area to deal with. So in the end of the day, we won that, and I'm sure a backburning operation would have resulted in spot overs into the catchment when the bad weather came along in the 24-hour period. Here's an example, I guess, of this was a largely unconsidered operation, I think, where we had backburning going off a road here. A lot of each lit up very quickly because there was a bit of a panic about the amount of fire activity going on here. And if you look closely, you see all the spots are spotted over. It's totally futile. The conditions under which that backburn was done, we never had any hope of being successful, but at least we were doing something, weren't we? Yeah, but it was actually counterproductive. It advanced the fire several kilometres. Here's another operation which was a bit better planned, includes some burning out internally, and same sort of operation, if you like, but carried out under slightly different conditions with a much better result. Which we're going back a bit, which happens to be this little area down here, I've got to say. But this was all going all very nicely, but yeah, so we were looking at this little area down here before. But the conditions were so good for doing backburning, they decided to go beyond what was planned and continue heading north, which wasn't part of the original strategy. And it seemed like a good idea at a time, but a bad day came along, didn't it? And so this is that little area there, that little tongue, and that little area then became 90,000 hectares, as well as threatening a number of towns and so on. So this is where the foresight, if you like, or the analytical input of a fire behaviour analyst can be quite useful to just slow things up. It's not because you've got an opportunity to do something you should do it. You should do it because there's a strong reason based on your risk analysis. So I guess we're starting to look at some tools, and some things are as simple as a spreadsheet, some things are little wheels, and some things are computer simulation models, and I guess you've got these flashy toys out there which everyone wants to have a go at. And so I guess I would argue that if you leave it in the hands of a young, inexperienced type person, you may end up in tears. So, well, we could hand it over to the wise old old men that have sort of had all the experience and sort of have a fair idea of what they're doing, but you know, the legs are a bit stiff and trying to control the pedals and so on can be a bit difficult at times. So if you're actually driving it at full speed under pressure, you may have trouble. So what we're trying to do, these are the fire behaviour analysts up here in the top. we need people who are fit for purpose and are capable of using the tool to its full potential. And to some extent, this is the difference between perhaps what we might expect from a situation officer who's got some general skills and a good broad understanding, compared with someone who has deeper insight and understanding of the complexities of fire behaviour and some of the suppression options, for example. So this is one of the spreadsheets that we've produced as part of the Fire Behaviour Analyst course, and the nice thing about this, I think anyway, is that you basically get a whole range of models, data from a whole range of models from the effort of putting in the data in just one location for the weather, for example. And you can see how different the models might be in a similar way, to some extent, in a poor man's version, to what the Bureau might do when they look at a whole lot of models of the coming forecast. Weather conditions. If all the models are saying the same thing, then we probably might meet Miguel's plus or minus 35%. But if we see two models are grossly divergent, then we start to ask the question, why is there a difference? So one of the things we spend a fair bit of time in the Fire Behaviour Analyst course is trying to understand why the models are different to each other. What are the assumptions that have been made? What are some of the strengths and the weaknesses of the different models? So I don't think it's a matter about picking the winner necessarily, it's about picking the most appropriate model for a situation. So you may have a grassy woodland, and the best thing to do might be to, as we discussed earlier in the week, to use the grassland model with a wind reduction factor like is done in Northern Australia, rather than necessarily saying, oh, this is a forest that's got trees in amongst it. But as a fire behaviour analyst should understand that, well, the difference between a grassy woodland and a open grassland is the presence of tree, which mainly affects the wind, not other aspects of fire behaviour. So when we get new models, and this is one of the newest we've got, I suppose, but fire behaviour analysts are then a key pool of people who are able to take this up and put it in the context of what they already understand, so they're able to understand the detail and the depth of knowledge that's needed. And I know VESTA was the name of the project, not the name of the model, but we talk about the VESTA model. And likewise, when we've got something like Phoenix, Derek and I sort of have nightmares about people misusing this model, because all you need to do is hit the big red button down the bottom and you get an answer. But it's so dependent on how it's used and how it's set up and the input data and so on. So that's a bit troublesome when you've got a powerful tool like that fast car. So in Victoria, they've decided to automate this process. This is not a real fire, but what comes out after 2 or 3 minutes after a fire has been reported is a projection out 6 hours of where the fire might be on an hour-by-hour basis for the next 6 hours, and then an email sent to the fire behaviour analyst that's on duty to that this has happened, and for the fire behaviour analyst to look at it and make an assessment as to whether it's a load of rubbish or whether it's useful guidance or whether perhaps some modifications need to be made to it. New South Wales has taken a different approach where they run two processes in parallel, and the fire behaviour analyst doesn't actually get to see this until after they've done the manual prediction, which certainly some wisdom in doing that. But this is so easy that that's a problem if it's too easy in a sense. But it makes sense to make it really available, having it automated. So I mentioned this briefly in my class talk. The power of this is being able to repeat this under a range of scenarios and with lots of fires across the landscape, where you can look at different fires of different probability under different scenarios, and then you can start to make a quantitative assessment of what the impact might be on potential house loss, perhaps on biodiversity values and other perhaps ecosystem services that might be in the landscape. So Andy Ackland, who's been with us the last few days, and a whole range of people in DSE and the risk landscapes are using this approach to look at different management options. So where ought they be doing prescribed burning? Where ought they be perhaps looking at fire breaks? Where do they have so much residual risk that they ought to be using other programs such as community consultation and the like? So the code of practice again, this is claims like I said before, but a fire behaviour analyst becomes so critical in both forming a document like this, but also in implementing it. So, and I mentioned the risk analysis for other interest groups as well. So, I guess in terms of saviours or disciples, fire behaviour analysts, I reckon, have saved millions of dollars in fire suppression and costs and asset in terms of suppression costs and asset losses, or lack of asset losses in certainly Victoria and I'd say New South Wales as well, at least. The expertise of the fire behaviour analyst has enabled better planning processes to be contemplated and implemented, so it's upped our performance game. They've been instrumental in gathering good fire behaviour observations and reconstructions. They have the skills and knowledge to test and apply new fire behaviour models and ideas, and they've been involved in providing much better evidence base for zoning and planning schemes and decisions, including burning programs. So I think fire behaviour analysts have had this role of really upping the level of fire knowledge and expertise within organisations, apart from the fact that they can draw maps under pressure during a fire event. So I'll just leave that up to you to contemplate. Thank you.